Where are we?
We're in the badge office at the Savannah River site and looking at the banners that tell you what all the different areas are where they have activities going on here.
All right. There's lots of people here.
Some are going looking for jobs.
Ah.
You made it back.
Well, say we're welcome. I push it back to you now.
You just came in this door down here. Did you just come in this door down here?
Yeah, we did. I did.
Okay, so you need to come up here and get a badge.
Okay, we were ready. Yes, there's the bell.
Do you have your badge already?
I do.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. You already got your badge?
Well, the date was June 6th of 2004, and we tried to stop a change in the law that allowed them to abandon high-level radioactive waste sludges in these underground tanks. And we failed because we had to strip language from the National Defense Authorization Act. It was a rider that Senator Lindsey Graham introduced in committee. What it did was it changed high-level waste to low-level waste on paper with the stroke of a pen. They got away with it in South Carolina and Idaho, but they didn't get away with it in Washington State and New York. But DOD's been trying ever since to get away with it in those places too. But this concrete grout is going to fail. The steel of the containers is going to fail. It may take 200 years, but Arjun Makajani and Michelle Boyd did a report that if just 10% of the strontium-90 gets out into the Savannah River, into the aquifer, it will violate Safe Drinking Water Act levels for strontium-90, which is a very hazardous radioactive isotope. It's a bone seeker.
What's its half-life?
Strontium-90 about 30 years, so 300 years of hazard. So there you go. Maybe they were willing to risk that maybe it will have dissipated to some extent before it leaks out, but it's
Kevin,
all a
can you
big
really
gamble.
quickly discuss what you're talking about in regards to what they're advertising here?
Yeah, this specially formulated grout is a concrete grout, and what it means is once they pour it in these underground tanks, it's an irreversible situation. They're not going to send people in with jackhammers to once they've realized they've made a mistake. So that's why we tried to change it, and we had to win that vote on the Senate floor, but it was a 48-48 tie vote, so that allowed this to happen. And Senator Lindsey Graham was the sponsor of this rider doing the DOE's dirty work. His own constituents downstream are going to pay the price. It may not happen for some time into the future, but
Thanks, Kevin.
They'll be long gone.
His descendants will.
So have you got anything you can share about any of these other?
no, that's the one that gets me the most. I mean, another issue I worked on here was liquid high-level radioactive waste, also called highly radioactive liquid material from Canada that was brought down here for reprocessing in H Canyon, because it's the only operating reprocessing facility in the country. So what they did is they used transportation containers for high-level radioactive waste designed for solid waste. They used it for liquid waste. And this stuff is so potent that if a very small amount were to leak into a drinking water supply, for example, a huge drinking water supply, like a drinking water reservoir, it would be enough to contaminate it beyond safe levels. Just a cupful, not even that much. So we fought that again in the courts. We lost, and they proceeded with the program, and they shipped by truck all of, I don't remember the number, but it flowed from Canada through a dozen states or thereabouts down to South Carolina. And they did have an incident. One value of the Defense Nuclear Facilities Safety Board is they have the ability to go into these facilities and look around, and they discovered that one of these containers of liquid high-level radioactive waste was contaminated above permissible levels. So workers who were around it would get a dose, but it would be above permissible. So it was a violation of law and regulation. And the action that SRS took in that situation was to turn the contaminated portion towards the wall, which at least, yeah, you can't get right in front of it now, but still, if it weren't for the Defense Facilities Nuclear Safety Board, we wouldn't even have known that this happened. So, got to keep them funded
Yeah.
and active.
And there's talk about defunding them?
Oh yeah. Well, there was a moment recently last spring during DC Days where they didn't have a quorum. They needed to have more, I don't know what their title is, directors of the board appointed, nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, and it was taking a long time. So they didn't have a quorum, or they're about to not have a quorum, so they couldn't function. So I'm not sure of the current status of that. I think they did get a quorum, but people were concerned.
So could you explain what this extracting, recycling, purifying, and reloading tritium is talking about?
Tritium's a prime ingredient in hydrogen bombs. It is actually the hydrogen they're referring to in hydrogen bombs. Tritium is radioactive hydrogen, and it has a much shorter half-life of 12.3 years. So because of the radioactive decay, they have to replace it over time. And so, unfortunately, new tritium is being generated at the Watts Bar nuclear power plant in Tennessee, a supposedly commercial facility, but it's making nuclear weapons hydrogen. That was a change under the Clinton administration. Energy Secretary Richardson approved that. So yet again, nuclear weapons and nuclear power are one and the same thing. That's where nuclear weapons get the tritium for the hydrogen bombs, is a nuclear power plant in the commercial fleet. So that's what keeps our hydrogen bombs catastrophically detonatable.
And what is the process for making tritium?
Well, tritium does exist in nature, but at very low levels. Cosmic radiation interacts with the Earth's atmosphere and changes some of the hydrogen and water in the atmosphere, for example, from either one particle in the nucleus or two, both of which are natural. Two particles is called deuterium. So you have hydrogen, you have deuterium, and if deuterium picks up one more particle in the nucleus, a neutron, it becomes tritium. And so it's in nature, but at levels of like 3 to 24 picocuries per liter in surface waters. So for nuclear weapons, they need very concentrated tritium. And it's a process that takes place in the core of atomic reactors. And unfortunately, tritium is released in vast amounts, really routinely, into the air, into the water. They have huge leaks as well. But at Watts Bar, they use lithium. That's how they get to tritium in that case. And it's specifically designed to efficiently provide material for nuclear weapons use.
So itself is not radioactive.
It is. Tritium is radioactive. They try to play that it's not harmful to people's health, but it is. It's a very powerful beta emitter, especially if it's like in your DNA, or it goes everywhere in the human body that hydrogen goes, which is everywhere in the human body, right down to the DNA molecule. And it packs a real punch, especially at that microbiological level. It can do a lot of damage. It can initiate cancer. It can cause birth defects. It can cause genetic damage. But there's a lot of deception in the nuclear industry, and they try to keep people in the dark about tritium's hazards because they can't contain it. That's the problem. It's so small in size, it can't be filtered. It can't be contained, really. So it's often just released into the environment in vast amounts. And if it does leak, then they say it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. So.
How is it released into the atmosphere?
They intentionally release it from operating nuclear power plants.
As a
gas, it would be a steam or water vapor. Tritiated atoms of hydrogen tritium atoms will become a part of a water molecule.
So when you see these nuclear power plants with the steam coming out of the stacks, is that where it's released from, or is that just water
Potentially, if
steam?
there's leaks between the various loops, but most of the tritium is going to be in the primary loop, which is the coolant water for the reactor itself, which does become radioactive, and certainly that water has tritium in it. But there are leaks between the loops. Some nuclear power plants have at least 2 loops. I think some have 3 loops. So that second and third loop of water is supposedly only for heat exchange. But if there's leaks, if there's cracks, if there's holes, then even those secondary and tertiary loops can become contaminated. And then even that primary loop, wastewater is generated that they have to get rid of somehow. And so sometimes they just dump the tritiated radioactive wastewater, which also contains many other radioactive hazardous isotopes, as a part of their wastewater discharge stream into the surface water adjacent to the nuclear power plant. And they do that routinely. During
So would that
regular
mean here they
operations.
would release it into the Savannah River?
This is a nuclear weapons facility, so there's even less regulation of environmental releases of hazardous radioactive substances. In the name of national security, they loosen the environmental regulations. They've been doing that since the Manhattan Project. It may not be as bad as it was back then, because back then it was really just free-for-all. Like an example is Los Alamos in New Mexico, where plutonium was routinely dumped into an arroyo, a canyon that's now called Acid Canyon. It was nitric acid containing plutonium from reprocessing for the bomb. And they dumped it in this canyon, just openly. And just recently, Dr. Ketterer, working with Watch New Mexico, took samples of soil from Acid Canyon, and the levels were concerning, and got a lot of news coverage because people hike that canyon as a recreational area. So the plutonium's in the dust. To get kicked up, you could breathe it in, and that would be bad, because it only takes a very microscopic amount of plutonium in the human lung to initiate lung cancer. It may take years or even decades. That's the latency period. But if you have plutonium in your lung, it's a real high risk for cancer.
Personnel, I'm sorry for the delay.